Hi, then welcome to another episode on the Helpful Baby podcast. Today I'll be talking on the subject of influence. Before I go on, I'd like to just appreciate everyone who's always listened and followed what we do on this podcast. It's really a delight to have you follow us on this journey. So I celebrate you once again. Thank you for being a part of the journey. All right, so like I said, I'll be talking on the subject of influence. So, what really is influence? The Oxford definition for influence says that it is the capacity to have an effect on the character and development or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. Another definition said influence is the power to have an important effect on someone or something. So basically, you can see that having an influence on someone or something is basically having some level of power over that person or something. So I'd basically say that influence is the power or ability to get someone or something to act or behave in a certain way. Now we need to understand that influence is a very powerful force. It's a very powerful force or tool which, when wielded rightly, can facilitate positive change, growth, and development. However, in the hands of the wrong person or when wielded wrongly, it can be very damaging in consequence. So the reality is anything or anyone can have an influence over you, and the consequence of that influence can be either positive or negative. We have examples of people or things having influence, on other people or things, right? So we have social media influencers. They are called influencers for certain reasons because they can influence the pattern or the way that people behave, the way they follow certain culture or vogues or trends, they dictate trends, they dictate what the cultural norm, is at particular points in time. And that is why they're very powerful. So even when businesses want to do advertisement, businesses want to get seen, they go through these influencers because they know that they can reach their target audience because they have some measure of influence over these people. Take celebrities for instance, knowingly or unknowingly, they have influences over the people who follow them. They have influence over the people, who are their fan base, who make their fan base. There was this, I think it's always been there, when you have, like this beef between two stars, so to speak, and it's not a beef as it were, well, to the best of my knowledge. So you find, I don't want to mention names now, so you find probably artist A and artist B. They both have their fan bases, and even the fan bases go as branding themselves. So you hear them giving themselves names, just to identify themselves as loyalists, to this fan base, and then there's always a continuous beef between them, arguing about who is better and all of that. And then much more than that, you find them, trying to act in certain ways, in conformity with the lifestyle of the person they follow. Also, look at how football or sports in general has an influence over a lot of people who follow those sports or who follow those, those kinds of sports. Football in particular, there's like this captive hold that football has on people who are football fans. They're just people who are diehard fans. Even when certain clubs, like I said, I don't want to mention names, but certain clubs, like, let me not mention names. I'm really resisting the urge to mention names or clubs in particular now. So we find maybe clubs that have not been doing well, over a number of seasons, and they still have fans, their families are just loyal to them, believing in them and all of those stuff. And then people go as far as doing radical and irrational things just to show their level of support or loyalty to the clubs they support. So we have countless examples, also our parents have influence over us. Our siblings have influence over us, especially older siblings, because they dictate certain things, in our lives, or things that we do, the level of exposure that we have. So parents have influence over us because of the way they've brought us up. You find certain people, let me use an example. You find certain ladies behaving in a certain kind of way, when they actually grow up or get married. And if you trace it back, you find out that it is exactly the same things that they found their mothers doing while they were under their roofs that they have also imbibed. Right? So influence is a very powerful thing, right? You also find guys behaving in a certain way. Maybe a guy, this is a negative example, but a guy who is aggressive, to his wife, or who is excessively, just hard on the children. You can trace some of those things back sometimes to the way his father brought them up. And, the father probably has been very hard on them and very aggressive, with the wife, probably beats the mother and all of that. So you're likely to find, a repetition of that kind of trait in that kind of guy as well when he gets married, except there's a decisive action, and an intentional action to break the trend. So influence is a very powerful thing. He has a hold on people, right? So there's a way that the media also have, has influence on people. Rather, there's a way that media, holds people, let me not say bound, but really, media to a large extent dictates a whole lot of trend, things that we do, and because we're basically subject to what we see, and that is why it's important to protect our high gates and ear gates, things we see, things we hear, things we meditate upon. And the media feeds us a whole lot of things, on a daily basis. So it's important to protect our hearts so that the right things can get inside and we're not held captive by the things that our hearts are allowed to meditate upon. So the media really has influence. If you want to shape the culture of a particular place or particular group of people, media is a very powerful tool to do that. See how media, is shaping, the culture, the cultural norm, in this century or in this generation right now. A whole lot of things has changed from the way our parents handed it over to us or handed it down to us. A lot of things has changed. So influence, it's indeed a very powerful thing. I've talked about the influence that celebrities wield, over the people that follow them. There's also the influence that drugs, people who are given to drugs and alcohol, narcotics, basically. When somebody's under the influence of, say, heroin, you see how the person can behave, act. You see somebody under the influence of maybe codeine, right? You see the person can act in certain ways, as opposed to when that person is not under the influence of that particular substance. So people who are given to using substances, dangerous substances, hard substances, you find that they act under a certain kind of influence, which on a normal day, if they had a control over themselves, they would not normally do those things, right? And when somebody is under the influence of depression as well, right, the depression can make somebody want to do crazy stuff, commit suicide and do a whole lot of stuff, right? So influence is very powerful, and it's very, very important that we pay attention to the things that we allow to get a hold of our heart. And how does influence really works? It works through meditation, basically. Let me just put it that way, because you are given to something, or you stay fixated on something, a way of life, a particular structure or system of culture, and then after a while it just becomes a part and parcel of you, and you listen to somebody over and over and over again, and the person begins to have an influence over you, because you tend to follow what they say, and you argue with any other person who doesn't share the same view or opinion about it. That's how all of these radical fan bases for a lot of celebrities are built. Right, so it's important to state this fact that influence can be very controlling and manipulative, when it is not checked or not properly managed, and that is what a lot of let me use the word wicked people leverage upon, right? once they identify somebody who, okay, I didn't want to use the example, but let me use it as well. Somebody who's a pedophile, right? And because he has some measure of influence over a child, and knows the vulnerability of the child and knows the naivety of the child, can easily manipulate that child into doing something the child would naturally not be able to do, either through fear mongering or deceit and all of those stuff, right? So influence can be controlling when not checked. When it goes unchecked, it can be controlling and manipulative, right? So you find people who have some measure of influence over you. In certain relationships, you find that how people tend to manipulate their partners because they have this influence over them. Influence due to the emotional connection and attachment that their partners have, with them. So they tend to manipulate them. You find children who are trying to manipulate their parents also. You have parents who are trying to manipulate their children. You have co-workers who are trying to manipulate each other. You find people who work in certain systems or structures or organization trying to manipulate the organization. Recently, I was listening to I think it was a news about somebody who gave a damaging interview about a particular group of people a while back, and then asked for asylum and in another country, and he was granted the asylum was based on the fact that he said his life was being threatened, and he provided evidences and all of that about it. He tried to manipulate the system. Just recently he was arrested when that country found out that he basically had been living a lie. He had told a lie, a perfectly crafted lie, just to swindle the country. And they'd given him, money into over 100,000, I think, pounds, at the time. So you find people who are just manipulative. So people are cunning and just, wicked in their minds, try to manipulate, people, all because they have some measure of influence over them. So it's important to watch our hearts, what your heart is given to, what comes into your heart, so that you don't end up being somebody who is manipulative. Sometimes people fall into this category or fall into this space, not intentionally, but then because they begin to enjoy the dividends of the manipulative way that influence works, they can't find themselves to be able to just stop. They can't just stop themselves. Some people for personal gain, manipulate other people for financial gain just because they have some measure of influence over them. People who maybe in position of authority and swindle their and manipulate the followers, dupe them of money, just because they have influence over them, right? So all of these are wrong, and these are, or let me say, these are examples of the extremes of how influence can be when not properly managed. Also, if not properly checked, influence can result in certain level of dogma, just radicalism. This, I don't know if that's the right word, but people just being radical in following people and can do crazy stuff just to support and just to uphold the idea that they have of things, they actually work towards or cherish, based on the fact that the persons they're supporting or the causes they're supporting has that influence over them. So it's important to always establish a balance, as somebody who wields some level of influence, or as an organization or as a system that wields some level of influence over people. It is very, very important. Jesus, in the scriptures, emphasized this a whole lot of times, right? And, all of the apostles, would, also emphasize this, right? Like you can't, that's just the reality. When people start to come around you because you're a person of value and you begin to exercise that value, and they find you to be somebody that they can trust, somebody they can confide in, somebody they can work with, somebody they can learn from, somebody that can make their lives better, they will one way or the other be subject to you, because the less is definitely blessed of the greater. But you must not exploit your privilege to manipulate those people or to exploit those people, right? You must not do that, right? God hates it. And even the laws of nature, like some people will preach karma, does not, smile that much. I'm not a preacher of karma and all of that, but then there's always recompense. Bible says, whatever you sow, that shall you surely reap. So it's important to, pay attention to this. So influence, let me say that influence, is established upon interaction and meditation. I said this earlier. So invariably what this means is that whoever has your ears, or whatever you give your attention to, holds some measure of influence over you, right? So whatever you give your attention to, whatever you pay attention to over time, has some influence over you. A lot of persons are subject to their mobile phones. A lot of persons are subject to social media. A lot of persons are subject to Netflix, right? Because they've given their attention to these things over a period of time, and so it has like an hold over them. Somebody who can't do without taking coffee is under the hold of coffee, basically, right? And that is how addiction starts in some cases, right? So whatever you give your attention to, and whoever has your ears, whoever you listen to, has some measure of influence over it. That is it's the law of nature. Whatever you give your attention to, one way or the other, you become subject to that thing. It's also important to reiterate that anyone or anything can have an influence over you. So you must be decisive in choosing who and what has an influence over you. So you're not just subject to anything and just anyone, right? Because it's a matter of your life. It's a matter of life and death, right? So you have to be decisive in choosing who and what has an influence over you. Let me also say that influence can be very subtle and can go undetected for the longest time, right? You're just working with somebody, you're just interacting with that person. After a while, you begin to notice that there are similarities in the way that you behave. Maybe you pick up the way the person. So let me cite an example. You find persons who are probably mentees of a particular person. They've listened to this person over a period of time. If you notice them after a while, it's either they start to dress the exact same way that person used to dress, or how that person dresses, begin to talk in the way the person, in the manner, imbibe the mannerisms of the person and the pattern of the way the person speaks, things like that. Or take a husband and wife, for instance. After being married for a while, you can begin to see similarities in the way they behave and the way they talk, the way they laugh, the way they gesticulate. Why? Because they've been together. Yorubas have this saying. They say that that means when you've interacted with something for the longest time, you also, in one way or the other, become like that thing, right? So whatever, just like we said earlier, whatever you give your attention to, whatever has your ears, whatever has your attention, has an influence over you. But like we said, it can go undetected for a long time because it can be subtle. It's just as you're watching, unconsciously you're picking up things unconscious, and that is how we as kids or children learn from their parents. Indirect teaching, so to speak. You just see what people do, and that is why it's important also to be aware of the kind of things we do and say around kids, around children, right? Because they pick up lessons, they pick up life's lessons in the most subtle way. You don't know most times that they're watching you, but they're watching you. They can hear you, and then they pick up lessons, they pick up things from those things they see that you do, and then apply them in their own lives. And a lot of things that some kids have picked up randomly as they were growing up, unconsciously as they were growing up, has gone on to mark their lives, as they grew older. For some persons, it is things, the things that they picked up, while they were growing as kids, are the things that has helped them, to stay ahead and on top and successful and prosperous, as they grew older. So it's important to be decisive as well. I don't know why I'm emphasizing on this about kids and children. Basically, it is important to be sure of and to be decisive, intentional about the things that you expose your children to, right? Be be intentional about the things you expose your children to. Pay attention to the kind of movies they watch, the kind of cartoons they watch rather, the kind of music they listen to, the kind of books they read, especially with a whole lot of cultural shift and trends, changing, these days, and with a whole lot of perversion, that has entered into the mainstream media. So it's important to pay attention to know the kind of friends they have, and watch your communication around them with your peers, with your spouses, with your wives and husbands and all of that. Watch the kind of communication you have with them. All right, because all of this is going to go ahead, have an influence over them, and form their outlook to life as they grow older. Right. So as we said, influence can be subtle and can go undetected for the longest time. Now, how do we become a person of influence, or how do we become persons of influence, or how can we also increase in influence for people who already have some measure of influence, right? The reality is everyone has some measure of influence. It can just be very minute, right? So how can you become a person of true influence, or become a person whose influence grows or increases, right? The reality is influence is attracted to value. Influence is attracted to value, right? In plain terms, be a person of value, be a person of substance, be a person people can easily walk up to. Like, if I have a conversation with you, I definitely must leave transformed, right? Whether in the corporate world, the business world, in education, in politics, in business, in finance, in ministry, in marriage, in the home. Be those kind of parents that the children can actually look up to. They know that whatever the case is, whatever the challenge is, if I just get home and speak to mom, I know everything will be all right. If I get home and speak to dad, everything will be all right. There are kids who are always eager, looking forward to when their dads are going to return from work, and just waiting to share with them, things they're going through, the experiences through the day. Why? Because they know that there's something to learn from their fathers. So as parents, I don't know why I'm emphasizing this again, you must be intentional about the growth of your children. When your children are in their formative years, even into their teenage years, you must be present. Do everything that you can to be present, because you are influencing their outlook to life, and you are also influencing what the future is going to be like, just by being present and giving them the right counsel, giving them the right outlook to life. You are influencing the outcomes of their future, right? So, like I was saying, be a person of value, be a person of substance, somebody that can be looked up to, right? Somebody that has answers. Now, it doesn't mean that you always have to have answers to every question. It doesn't mean that you always have to have solution to everything. But let it be known that more often than not, when you are approached, you have a solution to issues, not just a dumb head, not just an Edward, basically. Apologies to those who bear the name Edward. I don't mean Edward in the name, but somebody who just carries a big head and nothing upstairs, right? Be a person of substance, be a person of value. Develop yourself, grow yourself, be present, be involved, be intentional about your growth and development as well, and be also genuinely care about people. See, part of being a person of value is caring about people. A story just came to mind. It was about the woman who died in the Bible, Dorcas, I believe, Tabitha, right? And when she died, people came, widows, orphans, and all of those. They came around and they were crying and all of that. Why? Because she has had some influence over them. She has helped them, fed them, clothed them, and all of that. And they just couldn't bear that she's dead now. Now, one way or the other, we could say for some reason it was being selfish because they don't want their benefactor to go. But the reality is, it was not being selfish. I mean, they could not just bring themselves to imagine that somebody who's been so good to them is the one death will now take away and all of that, right? So when you also show genuine care for people in your immediate environment, you care about people, you love them genuinely with the love of God, people will respond to you, right? People will gravitate towards you. So honor and influence gravitates towards value. Honor and influence gravitates towards value. So the way to becoming a person of value, or the way to increase in influence rather, and becoming a person of influence and increasing in influence, is to be a person of value. Always have something to offer the world. Always have something to offer those around you. Always have something to offer the ecosystem around you. Just don't be a bench warmer. Don't be just a casual attendee. You are in events, volunteer. You don't have to be called upon to come and do stuff. Some of us are waiting for opportunity when they call upon us. You don't have to wait for opportunities like that. I was listening to something about Vice President Yemi Osinbajo sometime back, and talks about somebody who he had as he was former Vice President of Nigeria, and I was talking about somebody who he had as a secretary at the time, when he was a lecturer on one of the campuses in Nigeria. And these guys, when every other person had gone home, I think it was when he was a lecturer, because as a professor, when every other person had gone home, this guy would stay back, would try to do, the extra work. That time they were using typewriters. This guy would type stuff out, letters, do all of the clerical work and all of that. The guy was always going the extra mile, volunteered to do a lot of things, for the professor and all of that. And, he was really being of service. He didn't need to be asked to do something. He'll take the initiative to do those things. And, the vice president went on to say that when an opportunity opened, at the International Court of Justice in Hague at the time, and they were looking for somebody who can fit the role of, I think it was like an executive secretary or something at the time. He couldn't think of any other person than this guy who had served him, faithfully, who had volunteered to do things that most other persons wouldn't do. Once it's just they're 8 to 5, they're gone. But this guy will stay back sometimes, working with the professor and all of that. And he basically recommended him because he fit the profile and he saw something in him. And that is how, he is, right? So sometimes you don't have to just, you don't have to wait till you're called upon. You don't have to wait till, you're summoned. You can volunteer, right? You can volunteer, right? Don't just wait till that opportunity miraculously appears. Create the opportunity for yourself, right? When there is no door, or where there is no door, make a door for yourself, right? So be a person of value. Be somebody who has something to offer the world around you, to both young, to both old people. Be somebody of value, and you will see how that your influence, grows, in leaps and bounds. I hope you've learned something from this episode, and I'm hoping that you share with me what you've learned and what your view or opinion about this subject of influence is. You can do that via, my X account, and just tweet at me at x.com. That is THE_FOBB, or you can simply drop a voice comment, under this particular episode, and I'll be glad to review your comments and opinion. Basically, we're here to learn together because it is a community, and we're here to learn and to grow together. All right, till I come your way again on another episode of the podcast, keep living the life of purpose, keep living the life of faith. God bless you.